If any of you, the strangeness of this, if indeed any of you do somewhere still find this strange, the strangeness of this is that it does not purport to cure any ill. That's the real strangeness of this. If indeed there is any strangeness, I want to repeat that. If this is strange, if you find it strange, and if I'm insinuating that at some level it is strange, the strangeness is just where I almost put my finger. That it does not purport to cure any ill, or subtitle, right any wrong. But the lack of purporting to cure an ill is right at the heart of a certain kind of connection that this has and does not have to several areas I have been referring to for the last several tapings. And I don't bring this up for this to be self-referring in some way, because where this is not important, because it just barely exists anyway. But it's for another purpose, because your interest in whatever this is whatever this is. Just me talking seems to be some fashion of it, but without you listening, there is no whatever this is. And so if you do still find it strange at all, plus my admission that I may or may not be inferring that it may be at some level actually strange. But if there is a strangeness to it, by your perception or otherwise, the strangeness primarily is this, that it does not purport to cure an ill. If you will think but a second, okay, that's enough. At the next subject I wanted to, no. Do you realize that everything, I can stretch it enough and say that everything that has apparently a distance between the dancers and a stage and lights and an MC, metaphorically or otherwise, is involved. That is, that there seems to be somebody addressing somebody's. In all cases, there is at least a tacit announcement from the stage that it is purporting to cure some ill. The obvious ones will start off easy. Being a Monday, knowing that some of you, being a Monday. Religion. Whether it be a priest or witch doctor that they give some little box to stand on in the middle of the village, whether it be the Pope staying up on the balcony, whether it be some down-home minister in a tent, whoever it is, they are purporting to cure an ill. Political parties, social activists, Greenpeace, but all forms of political parties, even those that are not even very well organized, that are based upon some theoretical notion, they are purporting to alleviate, to redress social ills, injustices. Speakers of all stripes. I was trying to cover the gamut for you. I was thinking about TV's the only ones I ever see. But the people on TV, and then they appear in person and run these sales seminars, these motivational seminars. The proportion, what they're purporting is that you are not, you should not be as broke, as unsuccessful as you are. People giving speeches trying to hawk their wares of these subliminal tapes. They're purporting to cure an ill, and the ill is that you're not using your full potential. Anytime you have somebody apparently intent upon taking a forum, and they say, here I am to tell you such and such, or here I am, and whatever the subject is, they are in some way, it's not that hard to see, they are purporting from their perhaps discovered system of making money, of teaching yourself how to speak a foreign language in 5 minutes while asleep, all the way from it being apparently them as a spokesman for some past revealed theory, system, religion, notion, idea, or whether it be that they are the spokesman, that they are living examples of some academic discipline, psychology, sociology, all forms of self-help. It is simply this, that if there's anything, look at it from the audience view now, if there's anything in it, it hits entertainment. I don't know whether I want to drag you that far, but some of you should be able to see that. Entertainment, if they just say, and here they are, The Who, or Frank Sinatra, they are still purporting to cure an ill, in a sense. But everything else is specifically, if someone says, I just want to speak to you for your own good, I want to recommend a book that I wrote, I want to recommend a book that I read, and it talks about the same kind of problems you have with alcohol, with drugs, with your family, with your children. If somebody is apparently hawking some idea, and if you find yourself apparently listening to it, giving it some slight hearing, or to buy a book, or to show up, or to turn on TV, to listen to a program, it is on the basis, whether you agree or whether you believe it yet, that they are purporting to cure some ill. It may take you a few minutes to find out what ill it is that they're purporting to cure. They have got to establish the premise. And you may hear the ill, and you do not analyze it verbal in this manner perhaps, but it is simply not an ill that you consider that is extant in you, or one that is worthy of any attention. So of what use is something that seems to be locally useless if it does not purport to cure an ill? Of what use could it be? Now don't just look at me. Ask yourself. As nebulous, if not strange, but as shifting, as unwieldy, as ungainly, as ungraspable as it may seem at times, then you got to ask yourself, or you should be, then why do you consider to pursue it? Not just what I say, but what seems to be as best you have picked up. Some of you picked it up real bestly along the way. Or what seems to be your interest in whatever this kind of stuff is. What seems to be your interest chemically inside the privacy of your own brain, which the Constitution guarantees that you can do. What is it? Now yourself, speaking in the vernacular, yourself would believe that the effort you make with the kind of inner flow of ha-ha information that goes on inside your own internal dialogue would say, if pushed, that all the efforts you make at times when they're reasonable and you have some idea of what you're doing, whether they succeed or not, the reason that you try and change, the reason you make any effort, that you go take some class or you'll even sit there and listen to some guy speak for 30 minutes on a TV show, is on the basis that it might, not necessarily your words at that time, but it might cure, help treat, help alleviate some ill, some shortcoming. Why else can you find anything in the ordinary wiring system of you that would make you pursue to sit down and read a book, to spend 30 minutes watching a TV show, actively watching it, or to go out and to hear somebody lecture, if there seemed to be no purpose? Now it's hard to even respond to that tacitly to yourself, because it's almost a non-question at the three-dimensional level. It's not the kind of question you can hear what I'm asking, and what you want to say is, well, you know, hell, I heard what you're going to ask, and the answer is no, even before you got through. That I'm not going to go out and do something that I personally feel is of no consequence or that is useless. No, I would not do it. But it's not really even a question. You've never had to answer the question, because you don't worry about the answer obviously being no. We'll get the obvious in a minute. But the answer being obviously no, the question never arises. Should I, rather than just sit here, should I go out? I could dress up and I'll look in the paper to see what's going on, and I'll go out and do something that, as far as I'm concerned personally, is useless. That's what I'll go do. The question never arises within the general wiring system of Homo sapiens. It does not arise. Now back to me asking you to ask you. What could possibly be involved with somebody pursuing something that does not purport to cure an ill? Now you can believe, I guess even people out there are seeing this on tape at some other time and some other place. If this is the first time seeing it, I guess by now, or up till now, that you could still believe that I'm about to state some premise, you just accept it. It never comes into question. You may be seeing this tape somewhere and just immediately see me and don't like my looks, don't like the way I speak. You just don't seem to like anything about it, but you would assume, perhaps your system's already responded, I'm some sort of crackpot of some kind or some sort of idiot, and so I'm obviously going to come up in a second with some kind of crackpot or idiotic purporting of some ill that I am here to help. Of course, I'm going to waste time taping all this. Some of you might be assuming that I'm not just here to help. I'm here to help save the planet, to save mankind. You know, why just diddle around with I might be here to help you or a few people? Nowadays, it's not unaccustomed even to an obvious idiot when you see some just idiot show up. Nowadays, you're prepared for the man to say that he's not there to help people who have the inclination to be cross-dressing motorcycle outlaw gang members, which might limit your potential audience. You're prepared now to see some crackpot show up and say, well, I'm here to tell you that the danger of the greenhouse effect is not only much worse than you thought, but it is now directly tied into that great frightening phenomenon of one shoe in the highway. And that we are all in immediate danger, and I'm going to tell you why. Again, you may have no great interest, or you might see the person immediately and just be mechanically wired up to respond in a negative manner, but you would not be all that surprised for the person to state that I'm here, for those of you astute enough, concerned enough to be able to hear the truth, I am here to give you the truth. In other words, I am here to cure an ill, or to right or wrong, but cure an ill really covers it all. The question does not arise as to whether this is the premise of what's going on. You may not be interested in the ill that they're purporting to cure. You may not believe, just at first blush, that the person has the cure. The person may have the cure, but you don't like his or her looks. But the question as to, well, now here I am, I've got the TV changed, and I already sit back down, and I thought it was going to be one of those sales seminar things, or how I made $200,000 while sitting in the bathroom overnight. But evidently not. I've never seen this guy. Are you wandering around a hotel and you went to the bathroom? Before you got back to the bar, you passed something and it said free introductory lecture on something, and you wandered in, and here's this guy talking. The question does not arise, not in you, not in anybody. It does not arise that there is somebody in an elevated position, that there's a dance. There's a group out there going backwards, and there's a guy standing up there, a woman, leading. The question simply does not arise as to, does this have any premise? Is there any possibility at all? Have I finally found that there is some crowd got collected together, either through TV or radio or here in person, as they say, in some areas of the country, here in person, and have I finally run upon one that guy, the person staying up there, is not going to purport in this 45-minute free introductory lecture, is not going to purport to offer the cure for any ill. Have I finally run across that? None of tonight is meant, those of you who have been around the block here with me several times, this is not meant to be in any way pessimistic. It's not any kind of inside joke. It has to do with your interest in this. It has to do with how life is wired up in certain areas of its own body, that this sort of thing does come and go and percolate a little bit, and that there are people interested in it. There are obviously people interested in it besides me. It could just be me, but there are some more people interested. There's enough people that we've gone to trouble, some of us, to take a shower and to build a platform here and have the TV camera and have a place to meet. But notice, in a very particular way, if you look at it from ordinary earthbound, three-dimensional intelligence, this seems to serve, at that level, no local purpose. And the local purpose would have to be either, we'll get to this maybe in a minute if we have enough time, it's got to either serve a primary or a secondary purpose for it to have a local pertinence. Does this? Now some of you might at first blush, again want to say immediately yes or no, and probably most of you would want to say yes, it's been around a little bit. But has it served any real local purpose? Does it have any local currency? Does it have any secondary currency? Now some of you might say, well, it has made me, although I don't think about it a lot, some of you though might say, well, being around this and pursuing some of this and looking at a certain way, I'm not as shy as I used to be, I'm not as bashful, I can talk more friendly to strangers, or it's easier for me to try to pick up a date, or I don't worry so much over the fact that I'm not rich and famous anymore, but at least not as much as I used to. Now you can say that, and so you could say this has had some sort of real impact on me. That although you might let me off the hook and admit that I never said that this purported to cure any particular ill, but you could say, well, it sort of did anyway. I ask you again, are you sure? Well, how about this? What if you say that it has? And you would have never stumbled across whatever it has seemed to have had some beneficial effect that has been to seem to, if not a cure, some sort of treatment that seems to be salubrious to some ill that you thought you had. Now, since you got it from me indirectly at least, you got it from being here involved with this, since I didn't say it would, does that keep it from actually meeting that classification? That was almost an aside that I thought that some of you might like to jump over and take a step, but perhaps I was wrong. No, I don't believe I was wrong. I'll do it again. What if you do say, this has been at least some partial treatment to some ills I had, being involved with this. Then if I say, well, now wait, I never said that. I never in any way said that. I did not purport that this was a cure or even a treatment for ills, did I? And if you had to say, no, you didn't. Then, that which you previously, just when I started this sentence, said that you do, without any doubt, now that I bring it up, you are convinced you have benefited in certain ills, certain shortcomings that you had from being involved with it. And if I say, well, I didn't say that, I did not tell you that it ever did that, and if you say, no, it didn't, then I'm saying, does this final part, the second part, the latter part, contradict, in fact, wipe out, negate the first part? Can you be helped if it's not stated that you're going to be helped? That's not all that simple, and it's not all that complex. It may not even be all that pertinent to local people, but I'm assuming I'm speaking with a few people that may at least have their application in for a visa, whether we leave or not. Are you helped? If somebody says, I am helped, I am cured. What if somebody jumped up at one of these bear meetings? That's Southern talk for fundamentalist gospel, down home rolling the sawdust type get-togethers. I think, religious meetings. What if somebody jumped up and hollered, I'm cured, I'm healed, I'm healed. And the preacher says, sister, sit down, I don't deal with healing, I didn't heal you. Then with the person that jumped up, the man or woman hollered, I am healed. Also brings up something else, you people from other parts of the world that may be getting this. In the South, since I brought it up, some of these there's some schools here, they call them theological storefronts. Anyway, they give out diplomas, but I found out that one or two of them, if you're interested, the only requirement is that you have to realize that healed is a 3-syllable word. Just a joke. But if somebody jumped up And if you don't like that, I'll give you a more sophisticated one in 1 second. But if somebody jumps up and hollers right in the middle of this guy talking and hooping and hollering and says, "I'm healed. My bad leg, it feels fine." And the guy said, "Wait a minute. I'm not into that. I'm not in the healing bag. That's not my shtick here. I don't do healing." Then would the person still think about it a second, but don't answer. Don't even answer yourself. Would that person then go, of course, in the 3D world, I was trying through my pantomime to get you to see it. There are two immediate possibilities, strange possibilities. One is, well, I'm still cured, still healed. The other one is, well, you're right, I'm not healed. Both of them are strange. If you thought my example was a little out of step, what if you were in analysis? Years and years, a man with credentials, man right off Central Park West with a nice office. And after all these years and all this money and all this talk and a few from him and coughs, and finally one day you holler, "Wait a minute! Wait a minute! Now I see what you've been doing. I've sitting there all these times and only every once or twice a year going, Every time you went, as far removed as they were from each other, I did notice I had always, within the 15 minutes before that, I had always been talking either about fruits, vegetables, or my grandmother. And now I see what you've done. I am cured. I feel so much better." And what if the psychiatrist, faced with this kind of, shall I say, questionable scenario, and trying to hold some reputation, we'll assume, has to stand up and kind of pull himself together and say, "Sir or madam, what you think that I was doing, and this thing about fruits and vegetables and your grandmother, I got no idea what you're talking about. That does not fit in to the kind of practice, the kind of psychiatric theories and structures upon which I base my practice. I mean, I'm sorry, it's your imagination." Then would the person go, "Oh. In other words, oh, you're right, I am not cured. I don't feel any better." That was a long way to go through all this, but I thought some of you would see a little more than I felt a response several minutes ago. That is, if something does not purport to do something, can it be done? Even if you say, well, the premise was not such and such, but I experienced a result that would be in line with such a premise. All right, that all sounds fine, but what then if somebody said, well, look, that sounds all right, but if the premise was lacking, if that was not the intent, then the result you say you experienced cannot be. Is that locally valid in the 3D world on planet Earth or not? If somebody says, all right, here it is, there's this whole procedure, I have this important information, this process, it has some nouns in it, but it has a whole lot of good operational verbs, and the basis of it is 2 times 3. Variation, those of you who are good, I'm not going to stay on this forever, would be the variation is that this is not based upon 2 times 3. But either way, if somebody then says, wait a minute, I am very clearly now, without any doubt, I am now having the 6th experience. There's no doubt I am. Well, I can feel it. And the person, the institution, the voice that apparently put you on the road to 2 times 3, or even on the road of this is not based on 2 times 3, if that voice then says, sorry, that has no connection, you may or may not be having the 6th experience, but don't lie, tell me. Don't stand up here in my tent and say that. Don't roll over on my couch and thank me or try to drag me into this so-called experience of the 6th, because that has nothing to do with what I am up to. Is that possible? Is not the 3D mind going to say, well, 2 times 3 is 6, whether you intended it or not? Even if you say it's 2 times 3 and you leave it blank, or you say it's 2 times 3 and that's the end of what this is about. You go, well, you can say that, but there's still no doubt there's something past where you put the cutoff. You can say that this does not purport to do anything, but 2 times 3 purports to be 6, whether you intended it or not. Really? All right, some of you who may think that this has been too weird, and that you don't do this internally, that this does not affect ordinary people, God, are you mistaken? Okay. How about the obvious? When people say that something is obvious at the local level, the ordinary earthbound intelligence, when they say that something is obvious, ordinarily what are people saying? And for you people out on tape, new people, this is not psychological, it is not sociological, it has nothing to do with the foibles of mankind. It has to do with the transmission of energy, which is what human life is about. When people ordinarily say that something is obvious, what are they saying? Ordinary people are simply saying this. They are reflecting on something that is immediately in their best interest, not psychological. It certainly may appear to be that way, but that's not the basis of it. That is the primary, the secondary manifestation. But if anybody says, wait a minute, to another human, and the kind of energy transmissions going on, in this case, a large part of it is verbal, which is the singular job of humans on this planet, with common transmissions of energy with other creatures. But the singular part is the verbal, and one person tells another, wait a minute, don't do so-and-so, or you shouldn't have done so-and-so, and they inquire as to why, or what do you mean, or that can't be true, and the first person says, it's obvious. They're saying, of course, tacitly, how could you be so dumb, how could you be so short-sighted, that it's obvious what's happening here. It's obvious what you should have done. It's obvious what you misdid. But what they're saying, they're reflecting on that which is immediately in their best interest to find obvious. All right? That makes it local reality. That makes it locally obvious. And everyone can see the locally obvious. Everyone can see that which seems to be in their immediate best interest. To actually fire up the nervous system, to spark intelligence that begins to strain at the weight of gravity, you have got to see that everything is obvious. If one thing is obvious, everything is obvious. Now, there's no way that I'm going to even say that I am here purporting to make ordinary people see this. They can't, they're not supposed to. It's irrelevant. They don't need to. There's nothing wrong. I'm not here to say, hey, everything's obvious. And most people can't see it, but thankfully you got me here. The books will be available later, and the courses you can sign up for, because you've got to see that everything's obvious. I'm telling you that for whatever reason. You know, the gods told me, I figured it out. Let me tell you my life story about what a drunk and a dope addict and my terrible sex life. And I was overweight and then underweight, and I had bad complexion, and my nose was even bigger and funnier than it is now. But once I realized everything's obvious, now look, I'm rich, famous, and as soon as you buy my stuff. To purport that there is an ill, the ill has to be localized, and everybody finds something locally at just almost any moment. If it's pointed out to them, they find something obvious. So obviously there must be a premise to everything. And the inversion of it, when I admitted that most people do not think about what I was talking about in the last 5 or 10 minutes, that they operate that way internally, they operate that way, speaking three-dimensionally, in a kind of reverse. The question does not arise as to whether your own existence, whether noise is going on in your own head, that which you take to be your own individuality, your own personality. The question does not arise, is this in some way arranged, is this operating in such a way to help me cure some ill? In other words, have I been put here in me to help me? Look at it the other way. When people talk about change, when people want to do something different, what do people consider the ill to be once it's pointed out to them? Are you mean me, myself? You got it. It's just looked at, and of course it's not even verbalized that way. But rather than looking at it, since some of you, to say the least, seem to be finding this stickier than I intended a Monday to be, rather than not recognizing necessarily that this does not purport to cure an ill, look at your ordinary operations, you and everyone else. You're attempting to do something or you wouldn't get out of bed. Even if it's just minimal. You're attempting to pay the rent so that you won't be thrown out of your dwelling, or you're attempting to get enough money to pay a car note so that you still got some wheels. It's an effort to get up and go to work, isn't it? Why is it an effort? Are there communists staying outside, and as soon as you go out the door, they say, are you going to work? And if you admit it, if you look like you might, that they're going to start beating on you, start stripping you off with the death of 10,000 little daggers? Or if you got out of bed and decide, I have a certain sort of primary urge, I think I'll go out and look for someone of an appropriate sex that I might dance with. And you start to go out the door. Do you find a bunch of fundamentalist Muslims? Do you find a bunch of wild-eyed reformed Buddhists? Do you find a bunch of excommunicated Greenpeacers saying, are you going out looking for sex, and if you don't answer immediately, they in some way can ostracize you, they can make you laughing? No. Do you follow? It is not. People do not attribute, other than very primitive people still left around, or people still primitive parts in their nervous system hollering out about fates and gods and curses. But other people find, if there is something wrong, if there's some reason that I am not socially popular, no, it's me somewhere. If there's some reason that I am still not making large sums of money, not working my way up in the social pack, then what is it? It's not. The gods don't have it in for me. It's me. It's my laziness, my ineptitude. I am the ill. Can you try right quick, if you didn't like my first version, to turn that one inside out? What if you realize that you are not only not the ill, but that you could not also be that which apparently from some source inside of your own skull, inside of your own nervous system, continually purports to in some way cure an ill? Now you seem to have some stimuli, some assistance perhaps from without, that it is hard for me to keep working and plugging along. I don't seem to get anywhere. And then there's the stimuli. You flip on the TV, and here's a guy saying, do you lack the will to get ahead? Not the intelligence. Does something seem to be holding you back? You go, yeah. It's your subconscious traumas. It's your failure mode that is locked up in your unconscious mind. Yeah. Play my tapes at night, drunk or sober. Play them at night, and within months, you will be full of energy and on your way to success. Now you can say, if you were ordinary, you can say, well, it was his doing. That was the stimuli. Your brain chemistry had to go, hey, I like it. I like it. It is your brain chemistry, you and everyone else, is still saying, hey, I am purporting to help you cure an ill. Well, shit, you are the ill. I wouldn't say that to you. That's what, if you had the kind of internal dialogue that I understand they have on some planets, and this ever arose, you'd say, well, I'm here to help you. What do you mean that you're here to help me? You're the one staying on my foot. Of course, then you get good. Don't anybody stop there. Then you get good and you realize you can't stay on your own foot. But you got to get to that point that somebody is offering, like your forefathers and the primitive parts still in your nervous system, of the gods, or the God. I guess most of you grew up in monolithic religions. That the God's saying, boy, or the God's saying, oh, I'm ashamed of you. You poor, poor people. You terrible people. What you've done. Well, who the hell made us do it? You didn't turn out at all like I thought. Oh, I see. I mean, so you created us, and then, right, and then we didn't turn out like you created us. Right. Now it serves, as we know, this is not an attack on religion. I'm playing now with a game that you should, in a very crude and nonverbal way, should be approaching yourself, is that in the three-dimensional world, that which seems obvious is anything but obvious. If there's anything obvious about it, if you ever start sparking any greater intelligence, any greater operations of your own intelligence, it's to realize in the three-dimensional world, not only are there no completed sentences, not only is nothing obvious, the obvious, which is not obvious, then becomes super obvious of what kind of stuff is this? It's not that somebody's playing a joke on you. Now let me use another. It's not that the gods have got it in for you or humanity. It's that which appears to be obvious at the three-dimensional level is not obvious. And when you know that you're getting a little beyond three-dimensional intelligence, is when you see that the obvious not only is not obvious, but then you see obviously why you and everyone else always thought it was. Then it becomes obvious why I never saw this. Do you understand? That is more complex obviousness. This is not mere obviousness. This is super obviousness. It's the kind of obviousness that's tied to my kind of examples of drawing some sort of redrawing these kinds of supposed symbols representing human nature or human consciousness, and showing that the symbols themselves lack something. And what they lack of always coming up with the two forces like the yin and the yang and all that and good and evil is to draw whatever symbols that were across or the yin-yang symbol and to say that's not all of it. That doesn't begin to cover it. And I'm trying to tell the paper. Remember that example? The paper says, well, I don't see the rest. I only see the yin-yang. I only see that you've drawn good and evil, right and wrong. And I say, well, you gotta, it's the background. We're telling there's a local reality here that has to be present for you to even hear me say right and wrong, for you to think good and evil up and down. And if you could fold it up and the paper look at itself and go, oh. Which under ordinary conditions it can't, but that would be what would be super obvious. Do you understand? The paper, if I stood here, if I was so dumb, and for years, hours, I tried to talk, and I drew the yin-yang thing, and the paper said, and the paper was just right down the middle of the road intelligent, Friday in time, representing a person. And I said, all right, that symbol, you only see two things, but there's a third thing there. And it said, I don't see a third thing. I know what it is. And I can hold up a mirror. I've seen it printed in other places. And I said, yeah, but it's the background. There has to be something upon which to impress this. In this case, to draw it. And the paper go, there is nothing else. There's a symbol. There's a thing that's cut in two. Or you could draw in a box and draw it down the middle and say, all right, life amounts to this, good and evil. And you say, yeah. And I say, but that's not it. Those are just two words, but if I admit, I'll go along with the symbols for a minute. Good and evil. And the paper says, all right. And I said, but there's a third one. That's of equal significance. No matter what we call good and evil. We call it 1 and 2, C and D, this and that. But there's a third one of equal importance. And the paper goes, I don't know. I don't see it. That covers it all. You're going to have to change the genre of what you're talking about. You're going to have to change the classification because this covers it. If we're talking about morality, good and evil covers it. If we're talking about direction, up and down. If we're talking about the forces of the universe, according to some, it's the yin and the yang. And I say, no, there's a third one in all those. No matter what the classifications are, no matter what the divisions, there's a third one that says, I don't see it. If I could do that, and then it go, ah. Then you're talking about what would be revolutionist. Obviousness. We got to turn the tape over. Which seems fairly, you know what. whatever I want to call it, a real revolutionist, a real explorer, somebody involved with this that, to the point at least that they realize it does not purport to cure any ill. I at least like to be able to quote myself on the night I do it in case I never do it again. A real revolutionist. That is somebody whose intellect is operating past the point of necessity. Literally. Not the necessity that you ordinarily thought about, because that would be you assuming that this is purporting to cure an ill. Because you think, well, wait a minute, if you're saying that in some way you can be more intelligent and get your brain working in places not working, then you're saying if I could do that, then it would go back and help the parts of my brain that seem to be, maybe hitting on 7 cylinders. No. Just if it was operating. If it was fired up and doing things of no particular value on the local level. You would then see that from a more complex view that everything is obvious, in the same way that ordinary intelligence would only see that being obvious which was in its immediate best interest. A more enriched intelligence would see that everything is obvious because everything is in its best interest. Put another way, it is in its best interest, if you're doing this, to see that everything is obvious. That it's not weighted. That local reality is exactly that. Local reality, listening to the news if you're living in Orange Peel, Kansas, and all you got's a local station and all they report is the local hog prices and the soybean crops and what's the chance of them reopening a movie theater in the next decade. You simply are not going to have much of a grasp if they suddenly invite you on firing line and Buckley wants to talk to you about international events, and you're going to be somewhat limited in your responses and what you think. You've got to see, or you will see, that everything is in your best interest, and to see that it's obviously in your best interest to not be selective in that which is obvious. Looked at another way, anytime your own dialogue, anytime your own sounds points out to you that, well, that's obvious, you should immediately understand, well, that's a waste of time. If I, that is the me doing this talking, can say, well, that's obvious, this is going to have the import, I know already, for me to stop and say, okay, what, me? And me says, I believe we discovered the ground. And you think, and I'm only 47 years old and I finally figured that out. That is what it's going to amount to if you listen to your own nervous system, if you listen to your own established voices say, well, that's obvious. There's no need to look there because it is simply in some way tied to your general wiring system at that moment for you to respond or to say, well, that's obvious, and you're normally saying it to somebody else. Even if you're only saying it in your own imagination, you're saying it to somebody else because you're saying, well, it'd be in my best interest for you to agree that this is true. That is, for you to agree to my local reality. That's obvious. What's wrong with you that you cannot see that? And you're saying, why can't you see that this is the kind of energy that I am wired up right now to be transmitting? Why are you giving me problems, which is like saying, why are you giving life problems? That's not the problem. That's part of the transmission of energy. But you've got to see that for what it is and to quit fooling with it. There's nothing to be seen there. What's to be seen is everything. You've got to see that everything's obvious. And three-dimensional intelligence tells you that's not true. And at that level, it's correct. It says that there are things that are not obvious. There are things that you've got to study. There are things that you've got to ponder. There are things that perhaps will never be obvious to you. But there are certainly things that are more obvious than others. And if that's true to you, you're still operating on local time. You're still dealing with local reality because that is correct. That's the way it's arranged. When I say everything is obvious, I don't take that to be, if any of you did, to be too strange. I can put it to you perhaps Some of you like it better. Everything is equally obvious. Things that, if someone else tells you such and such is obvious, and they just state it as dogmatically, as unconditional as possible, and if you thought, well, geez, how could that person say that? Because it's not. Well, be assured that it is. You know, it's going to be of no consequence. It's not going to be some enlightening piece of data because it hadn't been sufficiently doctored. But if some other human says, hey, how can you say what you just said when what I'm telling you is just obvious? Anybody can see it. Be assured that it's true. That is, it's obvious. No significance whatsoever, but it is another report. It's coming from you. If you're from Lemon Peel, Kansas, then it is a report coming to you from Frostbite, Siberia. From one person there, they're sending out another report. They're sending one moment, one little piece of electrochemical data flowing through the body of life, and it's what amounts to is a report on their local condition. Not a frostbite. In here, they're reporting at that second on their local reality. They're giving what amounts to a very ephemeral, because we're just talking about it like this, report on the status of their nervous system and the transmissions of energies flowing through it. Do you understand that there is then the locally obvious and there is the universally obvious? The universally obvious is not metaphysical, it is not spooky or weird. I won't say that there's not any spooky or weirdness anywhere. But you're not going to see it around here. I don't mean here, you're not going to see it around this planet. You've got to first see that everything is equally obvious, which then puts you on the level, I'll try again, of being able to see the super obvious. Once you see that, hey, everything is equally obvious, then you think, my God, that was so obvious, why didn't I ever see that? See? Then you have upped the stakes. Remember, to no particular advantage to yourself, but and you can't say that you're a better person for it. Well, I'll leave that up to you. Right? In the privacy of your own bathroom or skull, I guess you can say anything you want to. I'll conclude this paragraph for the night and simply say that this kind of stuff, how about this, is generally not very obvious. I have had some of you in TV land and around here sending some questions again, and this would be a reasonable time perhaps, I guess we'll see, to try and give you a certain spin on them again. And the questions had to do a handful over the last few months of asking if I had anything to say or would say something specifically about relations. And trust me, they were the questions, I just tore out some of them and kind of made a little, what would you call that? Sort of a little premise to go on? No, I don't call it that. But it had to do with sexual relations. Or, for those of you of a more genteel turn of mind in California, interpersonal relations. No need to be crude about it, especially for people in Orange County. But the questions were about, such things. Here was the basis I was going to, this covers a lot, is they're asking, several of them did I have anything or would I give whatever info I wanted to put out about the differences between men and women. And several people, even one person made a list of some of the observations they had made, and some of them have a certain originality to them verbally, and some of them have been around for thousands of years. No offense to the people that wrote it, but noting that men seem to be at times logical and women seem to be emotional. Men seem to somehow want to know how to get from here to there, and women just want to get there. And one person said it seemed at times that sex for men was like, quote, a job well done, and for women it seemed to be a kind of confirmation of their very existence, and that sort of thing. Now, all of you have either thought that, heard this, read that sort of thing. Well, let me use this as an example, plus I will respond a little along the way, I guess, but about the kinds of things I was talking about. Maybe I can make some of this a little plainer if I go into seemingly material examples. All of you know, as far back in the Western world as Greek literature, plays, poetry, all the way up to the latest, I'm sure they're in some magazine, Cosmopolitan, Playgirl, or Family Circle, Harper, somebody. There's some kind of quiz this month in the magazine. You know, like for women to take, if it's a women's magazine, how well do you know your lover or your mate? How well do you know men? Men don't, it's not important, but men don't have exactly those same kind of things in their magazines. It's just more like pictures of naked women. Said, have you seen this woman? That kind of. By the way, so that you won't think I'm behind the times, that's not true. I've seen some issues of Playboy in the last year or 2 years, and they, for a while, at least the issues I had, they had a column, or they had two columns. One by a man and one by a woman, and what it amounted to, the ones I saw, and I got the gist of it, if they're still there, it was the gist of a woman writing from a 1980s observation of women toward men. Like, what the hell do men want, or what are men up to, and then the man was writing stuff. Well, anyway, you're all familiar, it's nothing new, but this is going on. There's the setup, here comes the first punchline. The differences between men and women. All this poetry. Freud supposedly wore out many, many boxes of cigars pondering that. People taking quizzes. People sitting down, couples somewhere taking this quiz and saying, honey, let me ask you the question so we can, I want to find out the differences. All right. The setup. Here's the first punchline. The differences between men and women are just obvious as bloody hell. They are. Now remember, this is not, I'm not purporting here to cure some ill. That is, to take the dumb people of the world that go, wait a minute, we've got to study and discuss and take quizzes about the difference between men and women. Now you suddenly say, wait a minute. You know the answer. And the answer is that you're all dumb, or you don't realize that it's just obvious, and I'm here to tell you. No, no, no. It's supposed to be like that. For ordinary people. But not for anyone who is going to aspire to non-local intelligence, to begin to have some idea, for no particular reason, of what life may be up to and what you may be up to in life. If there is an example, if there is just a wonderful example of the unseen obviousness, it's the differences between men and women. And of course, I am not speaking about physically. But the rest of it, it could not be more obvious. Now, I'm not here to preach, and I can't just say that and suddenly you or somebody on tape at some other time and place go, oh my God, I've been hailed. That is, I do realize what you mean. As soon as you went, it's bloody obvious, I went, God, it is. That ain't going to happen. If it does, you made a mistake. Because imagine I'm there and say, all right, how's it obvious? Then you'd have to go, well, tell me a little more, I'll get in a minute. It's not obvious in some way. That's local obviousness. When things are obvious, they're obvious. But as long as something's obvious in a certain way, in any way, it's not obvious. All you've got is still local reality, local obviousness. The differences. Now, people do not see this. There's nothing wrong. People are not blind. People are not stupid. And they're supposed to be involved. As I said, if you think it's that I was inferring at some sort of contemporary lapse in human mentation or weakness that too many men are now beginning to look like Alan Alda or something. I won't take a shot at women. In case you think that's what I'm saying, go back to the beginnings of the history of the awakened, that is, the operating mind in Western man. Look at what the Greeks were writing. They were writing the same sorts of things, musing, pondering, wringing their little Grecian hands about what is it that makes women so different than men? What is it? What? And then women, whenever they'd let them get their hands on a pen, well, what is it that men, how come men are so nutso? Why do men just want to do it and then say, you got a cigarette? Hell! And women had to say, do you realize that this is 350 BC? We ain't got no bloody cigarettes. That kind of thing. You know, how dumb can men be? If you hadn't, the only reason I'm going through all that is not just to get a laugh, is to understand that this is part of reality. This is part of the dance between the sexes. This is a quite valid, a quite necessary secondary level of reality. That people today, educated, sophisticated people, they take it more seriously than ever. It's not funny, it's not sarcastic, it is a part of the secondary manifestations, it is part of human life at that level, that there are serious questions, there are things to be worked out, and talking about it will help. And there are people now, life has made many people, it's widespread, thinking that now there is an improvement, that there is less difference between men and women, because we have talked about it in the last 15 or 20 years, and that the sexual revolution indirectly got it going, and the feminist movement, and etc. That we now understand each other better, or some educated, caring men and women do, and that sort of thing. But the question remains, I would say, of the real difference between men and women. And see, they're operating on the basis, life is making them operate verbally on the basis that this difference is in some way, are you ready? An ill to be cured. At least an ignorance to be eradicated. But in some way, it's an ill to be cured. And I say it's obvious. I'm going to tell you. Now, I know this is going to get a laugh. But I am going to tell you, the reason it's funny is because I am now getting past all verbs. I'm getting past all nouns. And I'm trying to take your attention, even though I'm fixing to use verbs and nouns, past even the description of the electrochemical flow. That's enough of a setup. I'm going to tell you the difference between men and women. But it's past the primary level. And some of you, as soon as you hear it, you're going to say, well, that's obvious, and you'll probably laugh. The difference is, here's men. We're talking about sex with either a little or a big S. I'm talking about the whole ramification, not the physical act of copulation. The question, the difference between men and women, is what I mean by sex. The whole, anything you put in there, I'll accept. Any question, any doubt, any struggle, any misunderstanding, whatever it is, here it is. I'm going to tell you the difference. It's men with spermatozoal cells trying to get out, wanting to travel, and women are available destinations cellularly. That's it. Anything else that can be said, I'm not here as any critique of romantic love, of poetry, of any activity of life. That's not the point. But anything beyond that is the dry brain looking down into the wet ocean of genetic primary reality and beginning to write odes. Beginning to be Shakespeare's, Sophocles', Dante's, Elizabeth Barrett, you know who. I've just told you the difference. That is sex. That is the difference. You can talk about the dreams of that which seems to stimulate you. You could talk about the kinds of women or men, the opposite sex, that attract you. You could say, you could describe to me that you've always been attracted to tall, blonde-headed men of a Nordic persuasion, or short, swarthy women from the Mediterranean area. You could say anything you wanted to. You could say that, in fact, you've never found true love because you felt as though you have never found that kind of ideal soulmate. You found people of the opposite sex that certainly erotically aroused you, but you seem to have never found the kind of person that you could lay out on a hammock or read the New York Book Review and converse with on a certain level. That's enough example. Part of the history, especially the literature, but the history of life on this planet, of humanity, is love. We all know that. You wouldn't have country music, you wouldn't have hardly any music with words unless it was love. It's one thing. If you can get down the genetic pool, I've told you. And you can forget, once you can see past this, as far as trying to find out the obvious, forget, just cast it aside. It's not right or wrong. Any ideas, any talk that you have about sex, about love, about relationships, I've given you the basis. Women are movable, peripatetic, walking around, available destinations. There's sexual, cellular nature. That's it. They're Home Depot. They are now the real specifics, you surely understand what I'm saying. This is beyond anything you can think about. I don't care what you think, whether you're a man or a woman. I don't care any words that come to mind in response to what I'm telling you. Women are walking around, ports open. That is that is right at the heart of the primary purpose. It's still within the transmissions of energies, but this is as primary as it gets. Forget anything that you've ever heard here. Forget anything that you've ever heard from anybody else here. It may be fine. You may write poetry. You may hum along with a song. That's got nothing to do with it. There's not an attack on any of that. But the difference between men and women, they are movable, open ports. They're looking for travelers. And the travelers are not men. The travelers are not true love. The travelers is not, well, maybe I can marry a dentist. The travelers are one thing. Past the secondary talk about it level, it's one thing. And men can say, well, certain kinds of women excite me, or what I really want such and such woman. The difference between men and women, it is the spermatozoal cells, the sperm of men, continually, until they say some men have reached a certain age and all that, but when they are active, they may say, well, certain things. I look around, I see a fine turn of the ankle, as they used to call it. I see a girl in one of those string bikinis, or I just see a billboard, or maybe I hadn't been laid in about 3 years. I don't know what it is, but and you can believe that in some way your mind or some outside stimuli has reawakened, or is right now kindled the flame of sexual desire. That didn't kindle nothing. The difference between men and women, in this case back talking to men, is you've got sperm wanting to take a trip. That is literally it. And you can say, well, I'm sexually aroused and I can physically prove it. You can't hide it normally. And the woman says, well, yes, you are. But if she says, well, why? If you was engaged in some kind of secondary activity such as talk at a time like that, and you might say, well, I've known you now for several months. Now, I don't know. At first, I don't know. I didn't dislike you, but once I found out that you were a painter, once I found out that you were a dancer, once I got to talking to you and found out we had the same kind of interest in music, of Haydn and James Brown. Never mind all that. If you're there now, wanting to visit the woman, it's not you. You are now, through the dry brain, perhaps talking about it without any doubt, prepared to talk about it, prepared to swear your love for even specific, verbally identifiable reasons. Not only do I find you attractive, but by God, I love your spirit. I love your mind. That's all. That's no more untoward than whatever's going on in the halls of Congress now, whatever they're talking about in downtown Beirut, whatever penguins may be discussing right off the Straits of Magellan right at this moment. That's all right. But what's going on is, inside that man, sperm. The molecular, chemical basis down at that level are trying to get out. That's it. That's being horny. That's being sexually aroused. And you can say, my dear, thinking about the kind of mutual interest we have in itself, that's part of life. But the difference is this. In a man, if a man's attracted to you and you're a woman, the sperm in him are suddenly wanting to take a trip. They're wanting to go somewhere. They want out. And a woman is a home port. And she is wired up that she has these feelings. I sure would like to take in perhaps a stranger from afar. Take in an exchange student from somewhere. At the cellular level, that's it. At the primary level, that is it. Well, that's enough of that line. You're really wasting your time here unless you've got some suspicion. I don't bring up such as this as any sort of attack on the romanticism of life, on all the kinds of little byplays. Plus, I am not being pessimistic. I am not attacking anything in life. I am trying to get you to see, those of you that have the ability, that there is a universal reality, that there is a quiet chemical, is the correct description now at our level. There's more to it than that, but there is an electrochemical basis for everything. There is a non-verbal connection to what I sometimes refer to as the primal flow, never mind what. But there is a non-verbal, there is a wet chemical basis for everything that humans do. It is then transmitted and then translated into the higher end of the nervous system, to wit the brain, and it is talked about if it is going to be of continuing or even local time significance to the health of life, that people will talk about it. The romantic love becomes important. Discussions as to the differences between men and women become important. Life is using that. If you are one of the few that might be involved with such as this and have such an interest in it, you have got to see that that is not the extent of it. That it's not a matter of trying to come to a better grips with the possible answers to what is the difference between men and women. There are no better answers. The game of what is the difference and how could we eradicate some of the differences or whatever it is they're talking about, it is byplay. It is secondary movements. It is the transmission of energy and not directly sexual energy. And you've got to see that there is, as always, a very direct, once you can see it, very, shall I say, obvious basis in sex. I mean, it's just so obvious. It does not mean that that which has been added to it, the secondary activities such as the speaking of it, all the way from poetry to pornography, eroticism, for those of you that think that sounds better, erotica. Oh, you mean those magazines? No. It is not that that is foolish. It is not that that is useless. It is not that that is in some way an ill. The ill would be for somebody attempting to do this is not to see that there is an obvious, just obvious as all bloody hell, to the question of what is the difference? What is it? What is it about men and women? I told you what it is. That's it. Anything else after that is you've got up to dance. You know, let's assume that in fact you did dance. And now you and your partner We're discussing, should you have a cigarette after you get through? Do you smoke when you get through? I don't know. I've never looked. That's an old one. But are discussing, do you come here often? Will you be back some other time? It wasn't that a nice dance? Do you normally do it and leave your gloves on? Do you? Yeah. Everything else is just secondary activity, including the feeling that there is some very deep, as of yet, unrecognized difference between men and women. There is something very, I don't know, elusive, yet to be grasped significance to sex. To carry this a little bit further, can you see this is also a living, right before your very eyes, right before your own brain cells, example, that is, let's say love. And further, it's kind of, let's use right now just love as a secondary reference to sex in all of its ramifications. I'm not using it pejoratively. I'm not saying it's ill-founded. But people now speak of, generally, if it's anything other than just an immediate wham bam 1 hour stand, people normally now in the civilized world speak of love in some way rather than just sex. That it has to be more than just actually fucking. You've got to, if you're going to have a relationship, there's got to be some kind of affection. There's got to be something more than just copulating. So let's call that love here for a second. This is, in regards to the obvious and a few other things that I'm going to try to drag in the remaining minutes here, an absolute living example. Every time, that is, of the dry brain looking down into the churning, somewhat formless as far as it can see, chemical basis of what I was calling the wet brain, the genetic pool of the individual and of life itself. The example in this case is every time a human, through their own dry brain operations, through that top mechanical part, every time it is saying, well, making some comment, even just pondering on, if men would only, if it's a woman doing it. That is, if men would only be, whatever, I don't care what, I can make up kind of examples I've heard all my life. If men would only be, a little more caring in the relationship. If men would only be a little more concerned about my feelings. I don't mind just good sex, but of my feelings. Anytime a woman says that, or anytime a man, conversely, says, Jesus, to go back to to Rex Harris's role, why can't women be more like men? What is it women want? To quote Dr. Freud. Why can't women That is, why can't they change a certain way? Do you see, it's just another obvious example once you see it, of me describing a quite real operation of life and its expansion through man, that the description I gave you, it's as though, picturing again, the brain itself being this wet, non-verbal part that was still being fed, let us say, through the stream of the primal flow, bubbling right in there, and it's like this formless orb of the good old Testament stories and those types, and then right above it is this kind of charged, talking atmosphere, the dry brain, that which seems to be you individually, the conscious you. And I've already given a handful of examples, but here is another obvious one, is there is a way in which that this is quite valid, that this kind of dry brain, your own consciousness, right, knowing it this way, is continually, in a sense, looking down in this stew. And it ponders. Now, it didn't look at it this way because it makes statements arbitrarily, unconditionally, that things should be this way. But what it's doing is pondering behind the words these kind of dogmatic statements that, well, women should do so-and-so, or men should do so-and-so, and of course many other examples, but for the night, let's use that. And it's like pondering, looking in there, and every time it says, men should do this, or why can't women do such and such, what it's doing is pondering, looking in there, and thinking. Of course, it doesn't think it this way, but it's thinking, beyond all my verbal bravado, which is mostly a bunch of smokescreen. What if, beyond what me and everybody else says is possible and will be possible or should be possible, what if I could actually stick my little grubby dry hand down in there and actually reach in there genetically and change it? That's what the test in Harper's Bazaar is. That's what the compatibility test in the weekend newspaper, that's what they're discussing on the Oprah show and the Donahue show. They're discussing all of it. And they don't know it. They're doing it individually, then they seem to be doing it as a chorus, as a group, that they're sitting there, and they have a whole panel tonight. And what they're doing, once you begin to see it, they set up what they're purporting to address. It's why, after 5,000 years of civilization, are men still so insensitive to the finer needs of female sexuality. And they have this panel, men and women and people of unknown origins. And they're all, if they're participating, what they're doing, individually and the whole panel and the whole show, and you sitting home watching it, you begin to peer into the skull. You begin to ponder down into this. There's a good old Jehovah of the Talmud looking down this formless thing and then thinking, I'll create something in my own image, or I'll create fishes and I'll let them turn into men. But then I'll leave them with fish brains and go, ha ha ha. No. I don't think that's in Genesis. I think I made that part up. But as though those kind of stories went, then it's like these people, these whole collections, doctors, psychologists, just everyday people, and Oprah, Geraldo, and all these people, it's like they all begin to peer over their own skull, and then they can do it once you understand how life is more complex in the three-dimensional sensual world, that then they can do it, that they're all collectively looking into the skull of life. And it's like they all look in, but they're sitting there talking, bringing up examples and saying what happened to me, what happened to my wife or this person. But all of that, once you begin to hear it, is everybody is like getting up to the rim. Instead of the witches there in Hamlet looking into this bubbling mess, they're looking down into the bubbling stew of the genetic possibilities, which are uncountable to the dry brain. That is, anything is possible and should be obvious. If you look in it, it is obvious. You can take it either way, that you can't see any local reality. It's all formless, which is the same thing as saying every piece of local reality in the world is right there. That is, all possibilities are there. And so then you have people individually, and then this group of people, this TV show, this panel. It's like everybody has now gathered around this open skull of life itself, or of humanity itself, the combined nervous systems, and they're looking at, but they're talking other ways. They're making serious statements, proclamations, asking questions, giving answers, but all of it, once you can hear it, is humans looking in to that seething, almost formless, dark, non-verbal, wet brain, the genetic poo, and they're all kind of pondering that beyond all of my shouts and hollers and what I'm saying here on the show and by my book and what I found out through years of experience, all that's just bullshit, and we all know it. They're all thinking, what if we could jump in there or get our hands in there and actually do what we're talking about? That's it. There's romantic love. There's Cosmopolitan magazine. There's the Phil Donahue show. There's psychology. I guess we just about covered everything important, didn't we? Oh, and there's the rebirth of disco. So you've got everything covered that could ever be of any possible importance to humanity. All right, I'm going to type the tail end, or try to right quick, tonight's tape. Anytime, whether it be sexual or otherwise, it was just a great example because it seems everybody accepts it, all ordinary people, as being a serious matter to discuss about how much progress are we making in men understanding the difference between them and women? Our women, well, what we need is another 3 or 4 years of the Oprah Winfrey Show, at least 5 days a week, and perhaps we'll move closer to a meaningful answer. No, the meaningful answer is in your pants. It's in your jeans. It's down in the pelvic region. It's in your own chemistry. How obvious. So anytime you're talking about change, the mouth, the dry brain can be talking about we should be making certain changes. We should be investigating in certain areas. We should be pushing forward, trying to enlarge the frontiers of our knowledge in this particular area. They're all saying that we are here. We are humans, and I'm inside of me. I'm my own human. By being here, I am purporting to be able to help cure, to at least treat some of my ills, collectively some of all of our ills. All of it is the dry brain, is local intelligence standing at the edge of the universe, which is looking into the wet brain. But you're staying at the very absolute edge of the universe. It's not science fiction. When you can do this, you're standing there, and you're doing it when you don't know it. But there's a difference. When people are ordinarily standing there, they're looking into what amounts to three-dimensional infinity. They're looking into the genetic pool. They're looking right into a living manifestation, one end, an opening in the primal flow. And any time they talk about, they're made to talk and to think about, well, I'm here to help cure some ill, in some way to change me, to change somebody else, to encourage people to change. They're all looking into infinity. They're looking into the genetic pool. Of course, this can't be true literally, but what it amounts to, and they're saying, it's life saying it behind us. What if you actually could reach in there and change something? That's all it is. So now why did I start out and say that the strangeness of this, if you do still perceive there's any strangeness to it, is that it does not purport to cure some ill. I'm glad I wrapped it up for you. It's a good thing I don't consider blank doughboy and doughgirl faces to be an ill. I'd be sick. If it does not purport, if you begin to think in such a way that there is no longer even a tacit purporting within you that, yes, I'm here to help me. You know, if I listen to me, I can help cure some of my ills. You're saying if I was standing up and looking as you described and was aware of it and could put my hand in there and change it, yeah, but all that's what if. All that's could. And I've just told you at the ordinary level, when people are doing that, they cannot. Nobody does. And what it amounts to, though, is life is saying, sotto voce, inside of man, what if you could? I'm trying to give you a hint. If you're not locked into that non-operational premise that I am here to help me, don't you get the hint? Then you might be able to it has 18 syllables.